Normally, January feels like it's about 57 days long, but this month it just whizzed by. And I think it's because I had a killer reading month. Nearly every single book I read this month was a slam dunk. They were all 4 and 5 stars, except for one. I read a total of 8 books this month, so let's talk about them. All right, so first we had Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. These were my first two reads of 2024, and they are the sixth and seventh books in the Throne of Glass series, which I started reading for the first time around the end of November. So technically, I started reading these two in December, but I didn't finish them until the first week of January, so I count them as January reads. And I read them together as per the recommendation of all the Book Talk and BookTube SJM fanatics. The tandem read is basically where you read both of these books at the same time and you switch back and forth every few chapters. And I thought it was great. I mean, it did take me the better part of 2 weeks to get through both of these books, but it was such a ride. It was such an adventure, and they were just two of my favorites in the series, perhaps only surpassed by the third book that I read in 2024, which was Kingdom of Ash. So this is the final book in the Throne of Glass series, and all three of these books were 5-star reads. I was devastated when the series was over. I'm just praying that one day Sarah J. Maas does a spin-off or a revival or something of this series at this point, because I just cannot say goodbye to these characters. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on the Throne of Glass series, be sure to check out this previous video I did, which is kind of a reading guide and a series review all rolled into one. So after I finished Throne of Glass, I kind of needed a palate cleanser, something to sort of pull me out of that universe, something that wasn't overwhelming, and that book for me was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This is a one-off dark academia fantasy. It takes place in this fantastical universe, but one that sort of has similar technology to what we have in terms of phones and cars and things. The MC is 18-year-old Effie, student at the architecture college, though she really wants to be attending the literature college, but that program doesn't permit women. And she loves reading and fairy tales. And there's this one author in particular named Emrys Myrddin, who is your absolute favorite. And then there's this architecture contest to redesign the late author's estate. And she enters and wins, and she ends up there. But then things end up to be more challenging and dangerous than she expects. There's also a rivals to lovers trope between Effie and the literature student, Preston. So I did enjoy this one. I was really engaged. I really wanted to know what was going to happen next. I was intrigued by the characters, and I think I read the whole thing in less than a couple of days. Mind you, it isn't very long. I also thought that the romance was sweet and well done, but it wasn't perfect. Like, there were definitely a couple of plot holes, or at least questions that I had that I felt deserved some kind of explanation. I also felt like it fell a little bit short on the world building. Like, it almost felt like a spin-off to something much larger, because there's all these details about a war and these mythical sleepers, and there's this lore around the island, but a lot of it never really ends up having much bearing on the plot. But it's still a very good read overall. Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book is about a thief who lives in the slums. Her name is Payton, or Pay, and she's living a lie because she has no powers, and not having any powers in her town is against the king's law. So if anyone finds out she has no powers, she will get killed or exiled. And then, of course, she bumps into Kai, who's the king's brother and the enforcer of the king's law. And his whole job is to sniff out these magicless people and then root them out. So, of course, it becomes your typical enemies to lovers type situation. It's kind of like Throne of Glass meets Hunger Games. Now, listen, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, because I know that this book is absolutely beloved across the internet. Everyone has been raving about it. And if you're one of those people who loves this book, that is great. I wish I did, but I honestly didn't. It's just not really the kind of book for me. It's definitely more about the character interactions with each other than the plot. And while I really love character interactions, and that's a really big part of a good fantasy novel for me, I just kind of felt like it was one blanket scenario after another. The banter felt like it was a little bit too much, and there just wasn't quite enough story to support it for me. And the author kind of does that thing where everyone uses everyone's name in like nearly every sentence of the dialogue. And that's kind of my pet peeve in books, because no one talks like that. So I'm not hating on it, right? My opinions are just a matter of perspective. Like, I totally get if you were into this. I feel like maybe I would have enjoyed it more if I had read it at a different time in my life, but it did read a bit young for me. And yes, I know that it is classified as young adult, but I have read plenty of young adult novels that didn't feel young to me. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. So this book ended up on my TBR by pure chance. I was shopping for books on bookoutlet.ca and I needed to spend a couple extra bucks to get free shipping. And I saw this book for $5 and I thought, you know what? Okay, throw it in there. I didn't even know what it was about. And it turned out to be my absolute favorite read of the month. I just adored this book. I love the way Laini Taylor writes. She just has this gorgeous way with words. It's about an orphan librarian named Laszlo Strange who has this uncanny obsession with a faraway city called Wheat, which no one has visited or heard from in 200 years, to the point where the city is basically just become a myth. In fact, nobody can even remember the true name of the city. But then one day, the citizens of Wheat come to the kingdom in search of help, and Strange gets a chance to fulfill his dreams of visiting the city. And of course, it turns into this beautiful adventure. Honestly, this story took my breath away. There's a beautiful little romance in there, and I just loved all of the characters so much. I also loved how in this book, there's no real true villains. Like, there's definitely conflict, but you can see why everyone is acting the way they act, and you have this empathy for them, and you just so badly want everyone to sort of redeem themselves and find their happy ending. So this one was definitely a 5-star read for me. I loved it so much that as soon as I finished it, I went online and I ordered this special edition signed copy from Illumicrate, and I'm absolutely obsessed with it. Look how beautiful it is. I think I showed this in my last video, but I can't help it. I just have to show it off again. Use of Nightmares. So this is actually the sequel to Strange the Dreamer. And this was very good too. I would say that it's not quite as good as the first book, but it was still pretty satisfying. I felt like some of the characters could have been given bigger arcs, which would have filled out the story and made it a little bit more congruent. Like, I almost felt like it could have been a trilogy, because there's this one part in the book where we suddenly kind of get this backstory dumped on us, and it's a little bit jarring because it's not really from a character POV as in all the other chapters. It's more sort of this omniscient narrator suddenly filling us in on everything. So I know I read somewhere, I think in the acknowledgements of Strange the Dreamer, that Laini Taylor had intended for this to be a standalone book, but then it turned into a duology. But I kind of feel like if she had gone a little further with it, it could have been an absolute killer trilogy. But all that said, it's a really lovely book and I enjoyed it. This one gets 4 stars. Last but certainly not least, I read Will of the Many. This book is the first in a new trilogy by James Islington and features a really unique magic system. People are powered by other people's will, or life force, I guess you could say. And it's a tiered system so that the more people who cede their will to you, the more powerful you are. And the main protagonist is a 17-year-old orphan named Vis, who is doing everything he can to sort of stay under the radar and not partake in this hierarchy system, which is all kinds of corrupt. I had been dying to read this book for weeks, but I really wanted to wait until I got a physical copy because I knew I was going to annotate it, but none of the bookstores had it, and for some reason I had to order it online, and even then it still took 3 weeks for me to get my hands on it. But this book did not disappoint. I really, really liked it. I feel like it does live up to the hype. I would say that it did take a little bit of time for me to get into it. It is a pretty long book, and I think I was a couple of 100 pages into it before I was really absorbed. And yes, it's quite political, but it's done in a way that isn't too confusing. There's a lot of awesome plot twists and unexpected things that happen that makes this book really fun to read. My only warning to you would be that it does leave you kind of frantically looking for the second book, and the second book is not out yet. The Strength of the Few is the second book in the series, and the release date is yet unknown. I heard that it could be sometime this year, but I guess we'll have to see. All right, so that is my January reading wrap up. My first read of February is of course going to be House of Flame and Shadows, which just came out, and I'll be excited to share my thoughts on this one when I finish it. In the meantime, let me know what you read in January, what you recommend, or if you read any of these books and what you thought. See you next time.